Okay, kids, we got 10 minutes, 15 minutes to read some Wuhan Coverup. This is from chapter 19. NAS briefly cracks down on Dr. Fauci. And NAS, I forget what it stands for. Oh yeah, National Academy of Sciences. Okay, in order to conceal its military applications, HHS, which is Human Health Services, stopped calling the research dual use and rechristened it with a less menacing moniker, gain of function. Thatcher describes the era's laissez-faire gestalt. Quote, "It was like being an outfield driller before the creation of the Department of Interior and EPA. You just go out, start drilling, here's my oil well. Fauci just founded whatever kind of research he wanted. There was nobody to say no," end quote. Following the disappointing performance of the 2005 bird flu pandemic, hatched by his crony Jeremy Farrar, Dr. Fauci began funding sinister studies to make bird flu more transmissible and more deadly. And he has 4 footnotes there. I don't want to read them all. More deadly. Bird flu, or N5N1, or H5N1, does not spread easily among humans, but when chicken farmers managed to contract it from their birds, it was terrifyingly lethal, smitting 60% of its victims. NIAID, National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, which they cause and they produce, financed 2 separate research teams to develop mutant strains of the N5N1 bird flu virus that would easily transmit among mammals. Yoshihiro Kawaoka, the man responsible for killing masks, that's the monkey, with the resurrected 1918 influenza virus, led one at the University of Wisconsin, and virologist Ron Fauchier, Fouchier, led the other at the Erasmus Medical Center in the Netherlands. There's 2 footnotes there. Through serial passage of the virus in ferrets, the 2 centers selectively bred deadly mutants that could hop species from bird to mammals through respiratory droplets. Dr. Fauci's research teams popped champagne corks when they each succeeded in cultivating an H5N1 bird flu variant that would infect ferrets, a lab animal functionally analogous to humans when it comes to pulmonary infection, and then spread through respiratory droplets when the ferrets coughed or sneezed. Oh, great, we figured out how to make it transmissible to humans. Glibly reflecting on the quote-unquote successes of his reckless experiment during the meeting of the European Scientific Working Group on Influenza in Malta, Fauchier, Fouchier, confessed, quote, "Someone finally convinced me to do something really, really stupid," end quote. Dr. Fauchier admitted that his professional triumph was, quote, "very bad news," end quote, since, in the words of Catherine Harmon at Scientific America, his viral production transmitted, quote, "just about as easily as a seasonal flu virus," end quote. In the December 2011 publication of Science, Dr. Fauchier, Fouchier, quote, calmly conceded, end quote, that the tiny Frankenstein he had constructed with U.S. taxpayers' dollars, courtesy of Anthony Fauci, was, quote, probably one of the most dangerous viruses you can make, end quote. At least initially, Fauci reported that his virus was invariably fatal to ferrets. A federal, quote, dual use of concern, quote, end quote, review concluded that Dr. Fauci's little demon would make a dandy bioweapon. Oh, congratulations, Mr. Bioweapon Extraordinary, Mr. Fauci. When preliminary word of Fauci's 2 studies leaked in late 2011, the newly minted NSABB, which I can't remember what that stands for, ordered a review. National Science Academy's Bulletin or something like that. Perturbed, NSABB panelists fretted that Dr. Fauci's bioengineered viruses might escape from either laboratory or their malefactors. Either hostile nations or terrorist groups might follow the detailed blueprint that Dr. Fauci's researchers were rushing to publish to fashion their own deadly bioweapon. Paul Keim, K-E-I-M, Keim. Paul Keim, a Northern Arizona University geneticist, which is otherwise known as eugenicist, before they decided to give it a fancy name like geneticist. They were eugenics before. Anyway, Paul Keim, the Northern Arizona University geneticist, who was then chairman of the NIH, National Institute of Health's Biosecurity Board, told Washington Post reporters that NSABB panelists were fearful about the dire risk of publishing this step-by-step recipe for forging an avian flu pandemic bug that might decimate humanity. Quote, we were saying, wow, it's highly transmissible with a 60% mortality rate, end quote, Keim said. Quote, you could kill 4 billion people in a flash because these viruses go around the world, end quote. An army of critics led by Mark Lipsitch, 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 at Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health, sounded the alarm. The New York Times called Dr. Fauci's experiment, quote-unquote, engineered doomsday. In interviews with the Washington Post, 6 scientists who served on the biosecurity board said the grave concern about the controversial research should have been aired before NIH approved funding for the Rotterdam and Wisconsin experiments. Quote, why didn't someone in NIH, when these grants were being reviewed, look at them and say, hey, wait, there's a potential problem here, end quote. Dr. Michael J. Imperiale, last name is spelled I-M-P-E-R-I-A-L-E, Imperiale, asked the Post. Professor Imperiale is a University of Michigan virologist who served from 2005 to 2012 on the NSABB, National Security Agency something like that. I don't know what the NSABB, I keep looking, can't find it. Okay. On this NSABB biosecurity board, and who sat as editor-in-chief of M-Sphere, small m, capital S-P-H-E-R-E, M-Sphere, a journal of the American Society for Microbiology. Agitated doubters in Congress and the Obama White House demanded to know why Dr. Fauci persisted with his daredevil dabbling. Quote, policymakers insisted on an explanation, end quote. Richard Ebright, E-B-R-I-G-H-T, told me, Ebright recalled the brouhaha, quote, Basically, the question to the NIAID director, Anthony Fauci, and the NIH director, Francis Collins, was, quote, how could you again have funded high-risk research without performing a risk-benefit assessment, particularly after we went through this same discussion 5 years ago with the 1918 pandemic influenza virus, end quote. Professor Ebright and other critics were particularly outraged that Dr. Fauci compounded the danger by funding his dicey hoodoo. Hoodoo, you do. You remind me of the babe. His dicey hoodoo, not only in the U.S., but also overseas. Little did Ebright know that Dr. Fauci would soon be clandestinely supporting the same sort of studies, not just in Holland, but in China and elsewhere as well. Or that the Pentagon, through the DARPA, or through the DTRA and DARPA, I forget what DTRA stands for, was secretly launching parallel experiments in the former Soviet state of Georgia, a poor and unstable nation. The incident showcases Dr. Fauci's singular capacity to use half-truths, secrecy, naked deception, and Svengali-like control over the media and scientific community to displace fact-based reality with fear-based orthodoxy that cements his hegemony over the public health narrative globally. While juggling these internal complications, Dr. Fauci masterfully closed an iron grip on the National Science Advisory Board for Biosecurity. That's what it is. National Science Advisory Board for Biosecurity, or NSABB, to defuse the challenge to his authority. Excuse the plane. We got 2 more minutes. Where am I? I was loud. Okay, to challenge his authority. While the panel included experts chosen by the Pentagon, hardly a disinterested arbiter, appointees from HHS regulatory agencies and NIH-funded academic grantees, all financially and professionally beholden to Anthony Fauci, occupied the remaining seats, making any punitive independence illusory. Furthermore, Dr. Fauci had effectively controlled the NSABB since its inaugural meeting in 2005, and this control enabled him to populate the overwhelming majority of positions with loyal acolytes and partisans. Dr. Ebright complained that these appointments allowed Dr. Fauci to dominate the committee's deliberations and dictate its outcomes. Quote, Dr. Fauci hand-selected the NSABB panelists based on loyalty and their support for biodefense. He managed the board carefully. Dr. Fauci's captive panel was informally called the Ferrets Committee, Ferrets. Okay, so they were trying to get it transmissible to ferrets. Perhaps they were thinking of weasels. Dr. Fauci further muted dissent by restraining the group from convening, but public relations about his bird flu capers. Okay, I'm going to read this last sentence. But public revelations about his bird flu capers had made even his staunchest acolytes mutinous, and a posse of newly insubordinate board members forced Dr. Fauci to convene its first gathering in over a year. Okay. more about this corruption and terrorism, the Wuhan Coverup, and the terrifying bioweapons arm race by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., our next president, the only one worth voting for, obviously, in this election, because all the other ones are puppets. Even the orange man, he's playing good cop, bad cop with Joe Biden. They're both mouthpieces of the establishment. All right, peace out.